Thank you for joining us for Measuring Social Impact, a webinar hosted by IDEA, the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance, and Calvert Foundation, IDEA's managing partner. My name is Sarah Yousefnejad Gallagher, and I'm the Program Officer for IDEA. This webinar is part of our Capacity Development Series, and we're fortunate and excited to partner with some of our social impact experts from Calvert Foundation. One of the top needs we hear from our members is how to effectively talk about the work they're doing and share the impact that they're making. So this webinar is really relevant for our networks. I'd like to introduce you to our guests from Calvert Foundation. First, Caitlin Rosser manages Calvert Foundation's compliance and charitable registration activities, as well as other operational and social impact projects. She has consulted for various nonprofits to help them create social impact measurement plans, evaluate their current impact measurement tools, and implement creative solutions to programmatic challenges. Diego Valdivia is Senior Risk Officer at Calvert Foundation, where he is responsible for assessment of the loan portfolio, guidance and subject matter expertise on loan structuring and underwriting, and risk management best practices. He also brings vast experience in creating and implementing social impact measurement systems and infrastructure to this webinar. By the end of this course, you'll learn how to first identify the first steps in creating an impact measurement plan that makes sense for your particular organization. 2, use the theory of change, or TOC, and logic models to guide the process. And finally, you'll find and utilize free and low-cost online tools to implement your plan that Diego and Caitlin will share with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diego.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? First, as you can see on the overview slide, we're going to look at why measure social impact, and also how to measure social impact. Here, we will spend some time explaining how to engage in an organizational assessment. Second, we're also going to look at the mechanics of measuring social impact. In this section, we will explain what a logic model is and provide examples of how to implement this tool into your plan. Third, and this is very important, this structure is very, very important given that organizations should be wary of jumping into impact measurements without fleshing out a rough strategy and engaging in organizational assessment in order to understand how impact measurement fits with the organization's mission. Lastly, we will also briefly discuss different types of data available for collection and how to determine which one is better suited for your organization. At the end of this presentation, sorry, I forgot to mention, we will provide you with some additional resources and links that should help you and your organization begin an impact measurement plan. Okay, so why do we measure impact? Although it may sound like an obvious question, it is extremely important for an organization to understand the main reason or reasons why a measurement of the organization's impact is required. So for example, maybe this is required because it's requested by donors or funders. Maybe it's because of marketing purposes. Or maybe it's an internal evaluation tool. Have the organization goals have been met? Or maybe it's a combination of all three. If approached in an honest and direct way, this exercise will better inform the how to measure social impact in a way that will ensure the most effective path for your organization. Life cycle of social impact evaluation. Regardless of the reason or reasons why it is important to measure impact, the implementation of a social impact evaluation plan can be broken down in 4 major areas or stages. The first one is the development of a plan to collect data. The second stage is the collection of the data. Third stage is the analysis of this data. And the fourth and last stage is the reporting of the data. This last step, it's very important because it will allow for constant updates of step number 1, which is how to plan to collect the data, which will ensure your plan is in line with the requirements of your target audience. Today, though, Most of the presentation will focus on stage number 1, which again is the development of a plan on how to collect the data. Oh, I'm sorry, and I forgot. If anybody would be interested on learning a little bit more about steps 2 to 4, I think there's an online poll going on right now, so please let us know if there's any interest on your part.
Excellent. People are voting now. Looks like most people are saying yes, they'd like follow-up webinars on the steps 2 through 4. Thanks, everyone, for participating in that.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, Sarah, for the introduction, and thanks, Diego, for kicking us off. So now that we've gone over the life cycle of social impact evaluation, as well as kind of touched on why your organization might want to measure impact, how do we start? We start always with the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And that's because how you measure your organization's impact depends a lot upon the problem that you're actually solving, as well as your beneficiaries or your participants and your donor base or your audience. So focus on the problem that you're trying to solve and not the activities that your organization engages in. And so I want to mention this because diaspora organizations are truly in a unique situation, as many of you are addressing problems both with the members of your diaspora here in the US, as well as working to solve problems in your home or heritage countries. And so this dual focus is highlighted in the sample problems that we have here on the screen. And so sample problem number 1 that we're going to use is an example from Cameroon. And throughout the presentation, we'll be using examples from Cameroon. That's just the example that we've decided to pick. So sample problem number 1 is Cameroonian diaspora here in the US wants opportunities to contribute to development in Cameroon. So obviously that sample problem is focused on the diaspora community here in the US. And then sample problem number 2 is that women entrepreneurs in Cameroon cannot launch and run businesses due to lack of access to training and capital. And so that is focused on a problem in the home or heritage country. And one thing to mention here is that to help identify the specific problem that you're trying to solve, lots of organizations actually engage in a problem analysis and they usually use a problem tree analysis tool, which we won't be discussing today, but could potentially be the subject of a future webinar, and we'll mention a little bit later as well. So, now that you've identified the problem, how do you work towards solving it? And that's when we're going to introduce something called the theory of change. And hopefully folks have heard about this tool, but maybe you've been engaged in a theory of change. Maybe you have a theory of change for your organization, or maybe this is a totally new concept for you. So for folks online that this is a totally new concept, I wanted to start with what is an actual theory of change? What is the definition of it? And it is an articulation of the results an organization must achieve to be successful and how the organization will achieve them, either working alone or working with others. And of course, the Diaspora Network usually works with others on these problems. And the theory of change describes, in simple form, the theory of how your organization will create change. I just kind of like that simple definition because it really hits home. Theory of change is the theory for how you're going to create change. And it's usually put into a visual format. And so creating some kind of visualization of a theory of change, which we'll do in a second, will help you and your staff to verbalize and engage in a conversation about your organization's approach to actually solving the problem. And so not only does this provide a chance for all staff to get on the same page about your organizational mission, but it will also ensure that your organization is sending a consistent external message to your audience about that mission as well. So to go and look at a visual theory of change, we again start with the problem. So at first, in this fairly complicated slide, you'll see the problem statement. And so that's what I want to focus on first. So the problem statement that we're going to use is from one of the example problems that we put on the screen before, and that is women entrepreneurs in Cameroon cannot launch businesses due to a lack of access to training and capital. And so the theory of change usually starts with the goal. And how you get to that goal statement, and that's that first blue box to the left of the screen, is basically just flipping the problem statement. It's almost as simple as that. And so if ultimately your goal is to help women entrepreneurs in Cameroon successfully launch businesses with sufficient training and capital, then that's going to be the goal in your theory of change. And so after that, you move to the two boxes to the right, and those are technically called strategic objectives. And they're basically ways that you can help achieve that goal. And so the first example one that we put on the screen is that women entrepreneurs in Cameroon, and we've abbreviated that as WEIC just for ease of writing. So women entrepreneurs in Cameroon have access to capital. And so that's one of the strategic objectives that will help you achieve that goal that you have all the way to the left. But then obviously you can't just stop at they have access to capital. How would they get access to capital? And so that's when you move all the way to the right. And these are just two examples. There's plenty of other ways that female entrepreneurs in Cameroon could gain access to capital, but these are two that we focused on. And that is banks could provide credit to women entrepreneurs in Cameroon, so your organization might engage banks to try to provide that funding, or diaspora groups could provide capital to women entrepreneurs in Cameroon. And so these are just two other potential ways to achieve the objective for getting access to capital for women entrepreneurs. And so if we go on to our next strategic objective, which was underneath the access to capital box, and that is women entrepreneurs in Cameroon have the financial and entrepreneurial know-how to launch and run businesses. And so obviously that's really, really key to launching and running a successful business is the financial and entrepreneurial know-how to do so. And so to achieve that strategic objective, there's two other ways that you could get to that objective. And I believe on the screen here we have access to training in entrepreneurship and financial management, and that could be through different, even online webinars or in-person trainings. And then another method for achieving that objective could be sending diaspora experts to conduct any kind of trainings in Cameroon on entrepreneurship, on financial management, or any other business topic that would be essential for helping women entrepreneurs run or launch and run businesses. And so now we've built a potential kind of sample theory of change, or again, your organization's theory for how you're going to solve the problem. And Diego is now going to walk through how you would actually operationalize that theory of change.
Cool, thank you. So now we're going to review what is called the logic model, or how are your organization's activities creating change. So first, what is a logic model? A logic model is a tool used by funders, managers, and evaluators of programs to evaluate the effectiveness of a program. This is a very general description, but it fits most of its usages. This logic model is composed of these following components. And you can see on the chart to the left, the first column named activity. So activity is everything a program does to fulfill its mission. Examples of activities are training, are special events, or programs that the organization engages in. The next one, if you follow the graph to the right, it's output. An output is a tangible product or deliverables resulting from the activities. An example of an output would be number of classes taught, number of professionals trained, number of patients served, or number of events held. Next component would be an outcome. An outcome is a measurable improvement or accomplishment at the beneficiary participant level. Can be short or long term. Examples of outcomes are graduation rates, incidence of disease, job retention rate, or higher income level achieved. And then finally, to the right of the table, you have impact. An impact is a long-term systemic at a population level change which is expected to take place as a result of an organization's programs and activities. An example of an impact would be improved health status of a population. By describing work in this way, managers have an easier way to define the work and measure it. Performance measures can be drawn from any of these steps. One of the key insights of the logic model is the importance of measuring final outcomes and impacts because it is quite possible to waste time and money, or inputs in this case, spin the wheels on work activities, or produce outputs without achieving desired outcomes, or impacts in this case. It is these outcomes and impacts, or long-term results, that are the only justification for doing the work in the first place, as these outcomes relate to the successful achievement of mission or program goals.
Thanks, Diego. And so now that Diego's gone over what a logic model, the components of a logic model, we're actually going to build a sample logic model using the two sample problems that we highlighted before. And so we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start with another problem that we posed. And that's the Cameroonian diaspora in the U.S. want to contribute to Cameroon's development. And again, to get your goal statement, you flip the problem. Goal statement would be Cameroonian diaspora in the U.S. contribute to Cameroon's development through financial investment. And so this is just one example that we're using here of using financial investment as the tool. So an activity for this sample organization that's tackling this sample problem with this sample goal could be convening Cameroonian diaspora members in the U.S. for investment symposiums. And so an output of that activity, and again, outputs are the tangible products or deliverables directly resulting from the activities, so directly resulting from investment symposiums, could be that Cameroonian diaspora members in the U.S. engage with each other. And there's lots of different ways that you could measure this type of engagement, and the measurement is called an indicator. So you'll see, all the little possible indicators for each of these different components. And so a couple possible indicators of this output could be just simply the number of symposiums that you held, or the number of people who attended each symposium, or the number of connections made. If you're really trying to get at the connections that each different member made throughout the symposium, if that's important to you, then that could be another output indicator. And so again, moving along the logic model, we have outcomes. And again, outcomes are measurable improvements or accomplishments at the beneficiary or participant level. And so an outcome of engaging in investment symposiums could be that diaspora members identify opportunities, challenges, and next steps for investing in Cameroon. If that's the outcome that you're trying to reach, then great. But if there's another outcome, such as diaspora members actually investing in projects and enterprises, then that could be another potential outcome that you've got there. And then again, ways to measure that, the possible indicators, could be either the number of projects and businesses in Cameroon funded, or the dollar amount of funding channeled to those Cameroonian projects and businesses. And then again, moving along the logic model into impact, which Diego outlined before, it's the more population, long-term systemic change that you're looking for, not necessarily the direct outcomes of the activities that you're doing, but more of the long-term systemic change. An example impact for this kind of activity could be that diaspora members feel engaged and invested in Cameroon's development. And this could even be more of a qualitative measurement. It doesn't have to be exact, number and percent kind of thing. And we'll touch on quantitative versus qualitative a bit later, but I wanted to mention that now. It could be measured with possible indicators like Cameroonian development, Cameroonian diaspora members feel more engaged. And this could be measured by, say, a survey where they've reported after these investment symposiums or after a series of them, they feel more engaged with each other, they feel more engaged in Cameroon's development. It could also be measured by an indicator of increasing levels of funding to Cameroonian projects and enterprises. So if your goal is also to increase the level of funding that was channeled to Cameroonian projects in the future, then that could be a way to measure your impact overall, long-term, across all of the money coming in to Cameroonian projects. And so that's one logic model that we've built, but I know that diaspora organizations are so different, and they engage in so many different activities that we also wanted to put another one out there as well. And I think it's really important just to see different types of activities and the different types of outcome or output and outcome indicators that could come out of those activities. So we're going to switch gears again and go back to the problem statement of women entrepreneurs in Cameroon. And this is a bit more of a complex logic model for an organization that, for example, engages in several activities and not just the one that we were talking about before of investment symposiums. So now we're going to talk about the problem of women entrepreneurs in Cameroon cannot launch businesses due to lack of access to training and capital. And a potential goal statement, again, just flipping the problem. Women entrepreneurs in Cameroon successfully launch businesses with sufficient training and capital. And so 2 activities that a potential organization could be doing is launching crowdfunding campaigns to support Cameroonian women-owned businesses. Because again, we're focusing here for this problem on women entrepreneurs in Cameroon. So an output of that activity, and again, an output is a tangible product or deliverable resulting from the activity, could be that the women-owned businesses in Cameroon gain access to capital. They gain access to capital through these crowdfunding campaigns, and so an indicator of that output could be the number of campaigns launched and fully funded. It could also be the % of the total campaigns that you've launched of those that were fully funded. And then an outcome of that activity of launching crowdfunding campaigns, and again, outcomes are measurable improvements or accomplishments at the beneficiary level. So a potential outcome could be that the women launch businesses because they have these crowdfunding campaigns that give them access to capital. And a potential indicator of that outcome could be the number of Cameroonian women-owned businesses supported or launched. It could also be the % change in revenue for those businesses if they're already existing. And then looking at impact all the way to the right of the logic model. And again, impact is more of a long-term systemic population level change, not just with the women entrepreneurs that you're working with, but all women entrepreneurs in Cameroon. Your impact could be that Cameroonian women-owned businesses grow in general. And again, not just the women-owned businesses that you're working with, but all of the women-owned businesses in Cameroon. And so some of the indicators of that impact could be a % change in revenue for women-owned businesses in Cameroon, or it could be the % change in the number of those women-owned businesses in Cameroon. And so again, we're looking at an increase, the systemic change. So we want to see the actual % change in revenue or the % change in the number of businesses. But this organization doesn't just do that. They're a really ambitious organization. So not only do they launch crowdfunding campaigns, but they engage in another activity. They send Diaspora entrepreneurs to Cameroon to mentor and train budding women entrepreneurs. And so this organization wants to also measure the impact or the outcomes or the outputs of that activity. And so again, we're going to go to outputs, and that's the tangible product or deliverable directly resulting from the activity. And if the activity is mentoring and training budding women entrepreneurs by sending entrepreneurs to Cameroon to train, then the output of that would simply be the number of entrepreneurs deployed to mentor and train these women. And then an outcome of that activity, and again, we're looking for the measurable improvement or accomplishment, is that Cameroonian women receive this business training. And it could be the number of women entrepreneurs in Cameroon trained, or some other type of outcome indicator like that. And then again, moving along to impact along the right of the logic model, we're looking at all Cameroonian women-owned businesses, and you can see it's very similar to the impact that was before, because really the goal of this organization is to successfully launch businesses for women entrepreneurs in Cameroon. So you could have the same desired impact for all of these different activities. And so you can see it's identical to the one before it, and that Cameroonian women-owned businesses grow. And the indicators could again be the same, the % change in revenue, the % change in number of businesses in Cameroon. And it's okay to have the same, if you've got a couple of different activities and they're all working towards the same outcome or they're all working towards the same impact, then that's okay. And that's what we wanted to display here. And so moving on, we're going to talk about one more activity for this organization, because again, it's a really ambitious organization. And that activity is creating women-focused business accelerators or incubators in Cameroon. And so an accelerator and incubator are types of organizations that either incubate existing business, and they give the entrepreneur financial training and entrepreneurial training and mentorship and all of the different things that you need to make your organization thrive. They kind of incubate the business for a little while, say for a period of 1 month or 6 months or even up to a year or two, and then send the entrepreneur on their way after this incubation period to grow and thrive. And accelerators do kind of similar activities as well. So if a diaspora organization is trying to create accelerators or incubators in Cameroon that are focused on women-owned business, then an output of that could just be the number of accelerators or incubators focused on women businesses in Cameroon that you've created. Or the percent of, if there's a lot of accelerators or incubators in a certain region, it could be the percent that are focused on women, if you really are looking at this from the gendered lens. And then an outcome of that activity, again, outcomes are the measurable improvements or accomplishments at the beneficiary level. Could be that Cameroonian women entrepreneurs are supported by these accelerators and incubators. So not only in the output do these accelerators and incubators exist and they launch and they are focused on women in Cameroon, but on the outcome side, they actually support the women-owned businesses that they say that they're going to support. And the way you could measure that, some possible indicators could be the number of Cameroonian women-owned businesses launched. And so that would measure how successful the accelerators or the incubators were. And then if you see the impact column, you see that it was the exact same impact that we had before. Because again, the goal of this organization is to help support, launch, and grow Cameroonian women-owned businesses. So again, we have the same desired impact. And so now that we've kind of touched on a bunch of different activities and how to create a logic model around those activities, Diego's going to chat again briefly on how you could measure all of those different types of indicators using quantitative and qualitative metrics.
Thank you, Caitlin. So now we'll look at quantitative data versus qualitative data. So what is the difference? Qualitative research is primarily exploratory research. It is used vastly to gain an understanding of underlying reasons, opinions, and motivations. It provides insight into the problem or helps to develop ideas or hypotheses for potential quantitative research. Qualitative research is also used to uncover trends in thoughts and opinions and dive deeper into the issue. Qualitative data collection methods vary using unstructured or semi-structured techniques. Some of the most common methods include focus groups, group discussions, semi-structured interviews, open-ended questionnaires, and unstructured observations. Sometimes it may be easier to measure something using a qualitative response instead of a number. On the other hand, quantitative research is used to quantify the problem by way of generating numerical data or data that can be transformed into usable statistics. It is used to quantify attitudes, opinions, behaviors, outcomes, impacts, and other defined variables, and generally results from a larger sample population. Quantitative research uses measurable data to formulate facts and uncover patterns in research. Quantitative data collection methods are much more structured than qualitative data. Some of the most common ones are surveys like online surveys, paper surveys, and mobile surveys, face-to-face or phone interviews, website, interceptors, and online polls. So following on the examples provided by Caitlin, we can look at the table, and for example, you see the different rows highlighting qualitative type of data and quantitative type of data. So an example of a quantitative output, for example, would be number of training sessions provided by the organization. On the other hand, an example of a qualitative outcome could be surveys related to the degree of financial confidence of the women entrepreneur that took those trainings. And at the same time, a qualitative example of an impact could be quality of life, the quality of life perceived in the sense of a perception has improved after women entrepreneurs have been part of the program. And then to finish, an example of a quantitative impact could be measuring the average income per household, and in this case, the impact there will be, expected impact would be to see an increase in the average income per household. So, to finalize, knowing that this is a very vast topic and we could spend all day talking about this, we wanted to provide you with some additional tools to begin your impact measurement plan. Some of these tools and resources, as you can see, are problem analysis. These are used to get an idea of the root problem or issue and their causes, often conducted with a problem tree, which I think is something that Caitlin mentioned during her presentation. Other tools and resources are stakeholder analysis. These are used to understand the internal and external stakeholders of the organization. SWOT analysis. This is used to understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the organization. We also wanted to provide you with some online resources. These are all free and very easy reads. So just to name a few, there's some explanation of the theory of change. There are some very interesting articles that you can follow up to deepen your understanding of this topic. So, no further ado, I think that's our presentation, so I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Caitlin and Diego, very much. I can tell by the questions that are coming in that this has been a really interesting discussion for folks, and I think already they're asking for some follow-up. So maybe I'll just dive right into the questions. One that sort of goes back to basics is the question of, it's from Sarah D. She asks, for those who are familiar with theory of change and logic models already in sort of the general sense, what is different about social impact measurement? So what's social about this kind of measurement specifically, if that makes sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I could ask, I'll ask a couple and then we can address them all at the end. Another is about the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data, and could you guys maybe give an example? So use like a conference, for example, and go through what the qualitative versus the quantitative measures might be for that. And another one about qualitative versus quantitative, how important is it to have both? Is one sufficient? Does it sort of depend on what you're measuring? And so I'll pause there, and then we can come back to the couple remaining questions.
Sure.
Is there one of those you guys want to address first?
Sure. I think the first one was a great first question for someone to pose, so thanks for the question. And what's social about creating a social impact evaluation plan is really the change that you're trying to see. So when we look at financial evaluation, you're looking at, revenue figures and profit figures and, all of the financial data, and hopefully you do want to see an increase in that. So for social evaluation, you're looking for a change in social indicators. And I think a couple of those that were mentioned kind of throughout the presentation are, you want to see, the number of women-owned businesses increased because your organization is looking at it from a gendered lens, and they want to provide access to resources to women entrepreneurs, say in Cameroon, using the examples that we've used, because women entrepreneurs in Cameroon don't have that access to those resources, the financial management trainings, the capital access. They don't have that already. And so because you're trying to create this social change, you want to evaluate that social change and how well your organization is meeting those social needs. For other examples that we've seen, I think Diego mentioned a couple, like income or job retention rate or graduation rates. The reason that we're calling this social impact evaluation is because those are all social indicators of how a population is doing. And so that is how I see social impact evaluation as different from other types of evaluation. And Diego, feel free to jump in if you want to you have any other thoughts?
No, that's pretty perfect. I think also somebody asked the difference between quantitative and qualitative information. I think the main difference between qualitative and quantitative is that qualitative, the main use of qualitative data and research is to gather reasons, underlying reasons, opinions, and motivation. So for example, quantitative information is very useful, particularly in the social impact field, to measure progress of your mission, of your goals as an organization. You can measure that in terms of numbers of beneficiaries that your program has, but the qualitative information or data measuring and gathering information is very valuable to understand how your beneficiaries are feeling related to the services that you're providing them. They could also give you some very valuable insight into why the numbers that you're seeing on the qualitative part may not be in line with your projections. Maybe it can give you some reasoning behind the motivation of why your beneficiaries are not fully using the extent of what your program is providing. It can give you an opinion that will inform the qualitative information that you have been, the quantitative, information that you have been collecting. So most of the time, the qualitative data is really the most important part in terms of explaining the data that you're seeing, and may help refine how you gather and report on that quantitative information.
That's a good point. Thanks, Diego. And there's another qualitative, I guess, impact measurement resource I wanted to share. A few months ago, IDEA did a webinar on storytelling and how to talk about the work that you're doing. We did that with working narratives, and the recording for that webinar and the slides are up on IDEA's website under our resources page. So that's something else you can check out if you're interested in learning more about how to tell your story with qualitative data. And then another, just for quantitative, just thinking about what sources diaspora groups might use for baseline metrics. Some good places to look are World Bank, the International Organization on Migration, U.S. Census Bureau statistics, Migration Policy Institute. These are just to name a few, and it really depends on what kind of data you're looking at. If it's a very specific sector you're working in or something, each of those spaces has their own sort of leaders in the field who have info, baseline data that you can use, but those are just a few. Let me jump to a couple other questions that have come in. Dan is asking, how does an organization choose between the many different reporting standards that exist? Like, how do you know which one's right for your organization? And Amy is asking about visual templates. So we'll share the slides with everyone after the presentation, but can you think of any organizations or sites where people can go download these theory of change or logic model templates that they can just plug in their own data?
Sure. I think we can tag team these questions. So the first question is the existence of many different reporting standards. This is actually a really good question because this is one of the main issues facing the social impact investment sector, is that compared to a financial report, the set of metrics or values that you're going to report on are very standard and very commonly known, whereas in the impact sector, given that there are so many organizations trying to do good in the world, but they all have different approaches, sometimes it's hard to come up with a standard set of metrics that will fit everybody's mission or goals for that particular organization. There are several institutional foundation groups that work with this issue, and mainly in the development of commonly used metrics that different institutions, depending of the sector that they work in, they can go and look at if any of those metrics relates or is useful for the organization. But I think bottom line, what we see more and more is that although yes, there's greater visibility into what metrics may be correct for each one of your organizations, I feel that bottom line, when selecting a metric on which you want to report, you need to have the capacity to explain both internally and externally how you came up with that metric, like the specific definition of the metric, how you came up with that, how you calculate that metric, how do you plan to report on that metric, and every single component of the number or value that you want to report on that would be easy for your audience to relate or connect with. So I don't know, Caitlin, if you want to build on that.
No, it was a great response. I think Diego really touched on how important it is to define all of the indicators that you are using, so you can communicate it to external audiences, but also so you can communicate it internally. And so everyone knows, okay, when you're talking about number of investment symposiums, what does that actually mean? And when you're in your own world and you've been working within this world for quite some time, you may know exactly what that means, but you need to be able to communicate that to external audiences as well. So that was a great point.
Yeah. And I think just to finalize that point, I think in our sector we have moved very quickly from a point in time where there were no metrics to report on to where we are now, where there's an overflow of metrics that you can select and report on. There are different websites, different organizations that now have hundreds and even sometimes thousands of metrics that you can go and pick. So being able to explain the metrics and how those metrics align with your mission, I think it's the first step in order to ensure a successful reporting methodology.
Absolutely. And I think there was one other question about visual templates for theory of change.
And I would add, this is a two-part question I just got a clarification on. So one, visual templates that they can use internally to develop these tools. And second, are there more attractive sort of briefer versions that they can use to actually share those templates or the data that they're inputting with their audiences? So can those also be a method to share the data externally?
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. And on the tools and resources page, which I believe is up on the slide, you'll see the second and third bullets. There's theory of change, and it's referring you to theoryofchange.org, and then also create a visual TOC, and that's also through theoryofchange.org. And they have what I believe is a free software where you can go and create your own theory of change with different kind of dialogue boxes, and they kind of walk you through the first steps of creating one. And not only that, but they also have some really great examples of theory of changes on their website as well. So I believe if you go to their examples page, it's fairly easy to find. And you can find ones that are fairly simple, like the one that we created today that only had the one goal and the 2 strategic objectives and 2 other things stemming from that. But you can also find some really complicated ones for really complex problems that organizations are trying to solve. And some of them are really pretty. Some of them are kind of cool. They've got one that's more like a tree, and it's got the roots at the bottom and then the leaves at the top, and they've embedded their theory of change into that. So I think that you can get a lot of different ideas from looking at those.
While we're on the topic of tools, do you guys know of any good data analysis tools? Like if you're looking at a questionnaire specifically, like you've put out a survey. Other than, I'd say, well, one answer I have is depending on the survey software you use, they do some analysis themselves, so that might be a good source. But do you guys know of any others, like other than the survey program that you're using that can help analyze data like that?
Specifically for surveys, I know online free options. One that I know is SurveyMonkey. I think that's pretty easy to understand. It's easy to implement, and I'm pretty sure it provides the additional value added of analyzing the answers that you're receiving. So that I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, and IDEA uses SurveyGizmo. We like that one a lot too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You can also look at Google Forms. Also has another one, which is great if you're using, say, the G Drive or Google Drive to integrate all of your files. And if all of your staff are using them, then it's just another great way to use Google. And again, it's free. So we're always trying to use as much free software as we can.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. So a couple other questions have just come in. Mai asks, how would you begin to evaluate something as general and broad-reaching as the empowerment of women? Like, where do you start with something like that? And then a couple other questions. Let's see if I can summarize them. One was about integrating social impact measurement into a holistic diaspora engagement strategy, and I can try to address this one to you guys. And then another question about thinking about diaspora orgs and how they want to measure impact. It's not just about reporting to funders and being able to answer about the programming you're doing, but how do you really address social impact measurement from considering diaspora members like deeply vested interests in the development of their home countries or of the well-being of their communities wherever they're living? How do you get at what they sort of feel and how you're addressing those goals? And I think we talked about this in one of the impact examples, so maybe we can come back to that.
Wow, these are good questions.
Yeah, these are great. And I think maybe starting with the women's empowerment question might be good, and then we can talk more specific diaspora ones, and I think that would be a great way to seg the conversation. So yeah, for women's empowerment, and I know that there's so much discussion around this today because you say something like that and it's like, oh, women's empowerment, it's so grand and it's such a grand goal. But how do you kind of get that problem? Where is the problem that stems from, that goal statement can stem from? And that's kind of why I emphasized throughout the webinar, what is the problem that you're trying to address? Because your organization isn't trying to address women's empowerment per se. That may be like the overarching theme, but usually your organization is addressing the lack of women's empowerment in multiple ways, through multiple different activities that you're doing, or because women's empowerment has different issues kind of underneath it. And so how I would start addressing that really grand overarching theme is by looking at the individual problems that you're addressing underneath that theme. And so depending on what country you're in, you could have lots of different problems that you're addressing, but really that's the main way that I would suggest breaking it down, is looking at the individual problems that you're trying to address and then creating a theory of change through that.
Yeah.
Maybe I can take a first stab at the diaspora question. So the question about how do you integrate social impact measurement into a holistic diaspora engagement strategy. So I want to go back to one of the examples that I think Diego gave maybe about when we were looking, let me actually go back to the slide. It was in the sample logic model here, the first one, about the Cameroonian diaspora convening to talk about investments back in home countries. So the impact here that we're talking about is Cameroonian diaspora members feel engaged and invested in Cameroon's development. This goes to the other question about how do you measure those felt impacts of the community. This is an extremely difficult one to get at, but I think one of the main ways that we do this now is through surveys, and we talked about this extensively. I'd say the important piece to remember when you're doing surveys as far as engaging it, incorporating it into your overall engagement strategy, is that when you take the time to ask someone for their opinion and tell you about how they feel about their community here, what they're doing to contribute back home, what their interests are in participating, and they take the time to fill that out, you have to make sure that there's some follow-up. And this is something that we continually see from IDEA side, that diaspora groups are asked to provide their opinions and thoughts on things all the time. And the major complaint is that there isn't something done with the information afterwards. So I'd say, at minimum, if you're doing this, before you host a conference, you want to know how engaged Cameroonians feel in, the topic of investment back home. Do a baseline survey when people are registering. Get that information, and then after the conference, you can do another survey. And the difference between those will tell you what potential impact your conference or convenings or whatever you've set up has done. And even if all you can offer is sharing that information, sharing the results of the survey that you've done, and sort of broadening the understanding among diaspora communities in general about how people feel about the impacts and what's being done in the space, that's really important. Maybe I'll just pause. Is there something you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that was a great response, absolutely. And then one minor thing I would add to that is because people are being surveyed all the time as well, you want to use your time with them very valuably.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very valuable time. So you want to make sure that your survey questions are actually getting to either the root of the issue or are worded in a way that's not confusing and that actually gets the data that you want to see. And yeah, great point. Follow-up is so necessary, and it's so important for continuing that engagement.
Right.
If you continue to share your results, people are always going to come back because they want to be engaged more.
Right.
Right.
Just like if you did a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for these women entrepreneurs, you wouldn't just stop there. You have to come back and report.
Correct.
For people to continue to work with you.
Yeah, if you remember, I think what's slide 5, the life cycle of social impact evaluation, the survey part falls under the second stage, which is the collection of data. So as mentioned here, there's several ways to collect that information. There are several points in your program or initiative that you collect that information. Then there's several venues in which you can collect that information. And then you always have to have the focus in terms of what do you want to do with that information. It's information that you want to track continuously. It's something that you want to track over time. That type of information is better suited in a quantitative way. Are you trying to assess the level of satisfaction that your users are having with your program? That's type of information that is better collected through a survey, usually online, and that's information that you will gather on a qualitative basis, not quantitative. And sorry, this is not something that we dive deeper during this presentation, but that's something that I think by itself could be a whole new session that we're happy to provide more information that if there's any interest on the topic. But yeah, that's where in the life cycle of the social impact evaluation plan you will look into how to collect that information.
Excellent. And there was one more question that came in. This will be the last one. It was about are there templates for surveys? And I think this goes back to what Caitlin was just saying. Even if there were templates for surveys, I don't think that you should use them necessarily. You want to make sure that the survey is highly, it's really focused on what you want to learn from members, not wasting their time with questions that don't matter or are irrelevant or don't speak to them. You want to be very careful with your survey design. And I'd say test these surveys before you send them to a large group of people. Send them to a few folks for their thoughts. We do this at IDEA all the time when we want to survey our membership. Yeah, I think that was it on questions. Everyone, thank you so much for your time, for joining us. Diego and Caitlin, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us. And from what I can see, sounds like people are asking for more already. So I'll talk to you about that offline. So thank you, and we will provide the recording and the slides to everyone by email by the end of the week. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.